Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. My first guest tonight is a neurosurgeon, a podcast host, and the chief medical correspondent for CNN. Please welcome back to A Late Show, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Sanjay, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
You and I are already experiencing the weirdness of this interaction. For the people at home who do not know, you were my last guest on the last night that we were actually in the Ed Sullivan Theater. What do you remember of that evening some 7 months ago?
You know, it felt very surreal. I mean, obviously we're in this empty theater, but we're also talking about sort of this impending storm.
Right, something that you can expect to have happen, but it hasn't really hit yet.
Right. And so I remember trying to really modulate my tone. I mean, I think this is really serious. This is something we have to worry about. But it's not here yet. So how do I convey that to Stephen? That's what I was sort of thinking. That was 7 months ago. It feels like 7 years ago. And then a lot obviously has happened since then. And
the bad models at the time were 60,000 by May, maybe 150,000 or 125,000 by August. How did those models work out? Like, give us some perspective of how bad people like you, who medical professionals who kept your eye on this sort of thing, and what actually played out.
Well, what we're seeing here in these models, there's a joke among statisticians. They say all models are wrong, some are useful. And that's how I would look at these models as well. I think what a lot of people were looking at was, let's project how things are going here, but also let's look at a previous pandemic, the 1918 flu pandemic, and sort of see how was that behaving during the same time. And it sort of started around the same time of year, in 1918, as this started in 2020. And within the first 7 months or so of that pandemic, 100 years ago, 75,000 people had died. The population of the country was a third of what it is. Multiply 75 times 3, 225,000, which is exactly roughly how many people had died in this pandemic at this time. So it was tracking almost exactly with that 1918 flu pandemic. I mean, we have hospitals, we have ICUs, we have therapeutics, we have all these advanced technologies, and we were basically behaving exactly the same as 100 years ago.
Okay, well, that gets to my next question, which is where are we now, both in the United States and globally? Like, how is the United States comparing right now to other countries that are dealing with the coronavirus? It certainly feels like we're kind of at the bottom of the rung in terms of our mitigation of the spread of the coronavirus. Is that the truth? Are we actually shanking this right now?
I think sadly we are. I mean, we've learned so much about this virus. We know what it does to the body. We know how to greatly reduce the spread. And that's sort of where the story stopped in the United States, because then we didn't implement those things. And so, there was this fascinating study came out of Columbia, basically said, okay, let's look at other countries around the world. And let's say if we had done the same things in this country that had happened in that country, where would we be? So take South Korea. South Korea is important because the first patient was diagnosed in South Korea on the same day the first patient was diagnosed in the United States. So it's a good sort of starting point. If we had done in the United States what they did in South Korea, Stephen, 2,799 people, they estimate, only would have died. 2,700 versus 225,000. Japan, if we had done what Japan had done, 4,315 people. They model. Australia, 11,619. I can keep going. The point is that there were so many countries around the world. They didn't have a vaccine. They didn't have some magical therapeutic. They had nothing we didn't have. And had we done what they did, which was just basically these public health practices, we'd be in a much, much different position right now.
Mark Meadows this weekend said we're not going to control the pandemic. Yet at the same time, I believe, is it today, the Trump administration put out a list of the president's accomplishments. And one of the accomplishments that they list for the president is stopping the coronavirus pandemic. Do those, your reaction as a medical professional to the idea that the president has stopped the coronavirus pandemic?
That's in the mission accomplished box, huh?
Yes, I suppose so.
70,000 people infected, 500,000 people infected this past week. Hospitals are overrun. I mean, some of these are people that I talk to on a regular basis. They're in their communities looking at buildings right now going, could that be a hospital? Could that be a hospital? I mean, you just heard the projections, 150, 200,000 more people may die, within the next few months. So we're nowhere near that. The thing that's frustrating, I think, Stephen, is that there's been the sense that, we surrender, this whole waving the white flag. And I think it's even worse than that, in the sense that we didn't even just surrender. We kind of opened the door for the virus and said, come on in. And it was this herd immunity sort of idea. Just let people get infected.
And that seems to have really been the plan from the beginning. As much as, Fauci came out and said that he advised the president very early on when the president said, just let it wash over the country. Right. What happens if we do that? Fauci said, you'd have millions of dead people. That's why you can't do that. But it seems that really is the plan.
It's certainly what the policies have led to in this country. We don't have a national strategy. We're still not, doing basic public health measures. There's probably 5 times as many people out there that have been infected that even know it because of the lack of testing. So it certainly seems like it. But what was interesting is I started talking to people over the last few months, Stephen, it's this idea of American exceptionalism, in the sense that we are going to have the home run hit with the vaccine, right? We're putting all of our eggs in that basket.
Well, where are we with that? What do we know? Because he keeps dangling like a carrot.
It's right. He does. And it's not going to be, there may be an emergency use authorization for it by the end of the year. Maybe it starts getting distributed by middle of next year. And even then, it may require 2 shots. If we're talking about vaccinating the world, Stephen, this will be one of the largest vaccination projects we've ever seen. The distribution alone, and these things need to be stored at a very certain temperature. So it's going to be a huge undertaking, and it is happening. It is worth celebrating how fast the medical innovation has occurred here. We didn't even know what this disease was a year ago, and we may have a vaccine by the end of the year. But it's not going to flip a switch. And I think that's the critical point, is that, we thought this would be the home run, and it will be very helpful. But in the meantime, we didn't do all the other things that would have made a huge difference. It's kind of like that. I don't know if you've ever seen the purple pill commercial for Prilosec.
Sure.
It's basically like, eat whatever you want and then just take this purple pill, right? That is a metaphor for how the United States dealt with this coronavirus pandemic. Do whatever we want, and then we got the purple pill, which was the vaccine. But it's not here, and it's not going to do what people think it's going to do.
We have to take a quick break, but stick around. We'll be right back with more Dr. Sanjay Gupta.